And we are live after the Detroit Pistons nearly pull off a 23-point comeback to the class of the NBA, the Boston Celtics, after Detroit gave up the most threes in a first half since 1996, 1997. So, quite literally in my lifetime. The Pistons came out and in that final minute and a half of the second quarter and in that third quarter played perhaps some of the best basketball that they've played in like a year and a half to 2 years. Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham combined for 47 points. They both looked really solid together, combined for 16 assists as well, kind of, qualming a lot of the narratives of whether or not those guys can play together. But despite a lot of the bright spots, despite the great defensive effort, the hustle plays, the potential identity being laid out for what this Pistons team can look like as a successful version of itself. They fall up just short against the Boston Celtics, losing 124 to 118. Let's get some things out of the way because I think it's important to acknowledge a couple of things. Number one, the Boston Celtics are the best team in basketball, and it's not even close. I tweeted at the beginning of the game, they could potentially win 74 games this season and break the record for the single season win record. And I would not be shocked because of how good that team is. So the fact that the Pistons were in that game and were able to pull off that comeback is a shocker. However, having said that, the Pistons are far beyond the days of moral victories, good losses, things of that nature. Quite frankly, the fan base is just not there for it at this time anymore. And listen, that's justified, right? So let's go over the game itself and just some of the performances, some of the things that stood out. I think immediately when you jump to positives, you have to look no further than the performance that we saw from Jaden Ivey yet again tonight. I would say without a question, he is the most improved Piston thus far this season. His level of play has been stellar. And, this is something I've been talking about ever since Jaden Ivey's rookie year, is that he is the quickest player in the NBA, or one, if not one of the quickest players. His speed is up there with anybody, but he couldn't always keep up mentally with his own speed. He couldn't always keep up mentally with the speed of the NBA. And so a lot of times he'll go up to the rim, he'll get in the air, and it's like that Joker line where he's like, do I really look like a guy with a man? Like that was Jaden Ivey's energy every time he went to the basket, or pretty much any time that he had the basketball. But through the first three games, and granted, first three games, however, they have played three of the top four teams in the Eastern Conference last season. They played the two teams that are in the conference finals, and then the team that Boston beat in the conference semis. Jaden Ivey's hooping. He finished with 26, 10 of 18 from the field, probably the best defense that he's played overall as a Piston thus far. Again, the 6 assists to only 1 turnover. He was really solid in that regard. Again, the game is slowed down for him. And the thing that's been consistent, no matter who's been his coach, no matter who's been his general manager, they all say the exact same thing. Jaden Ivey almost works too hard. We have to tell him to dial it back sometimes. This guy's always in the gym. So for me, like, I'm not surprised at all that we're seeing this. And if anything, props to the coaching staff for being able to equip a Jaden Ivey to see that talent and to really kind of help Jaden Ivey move past what was not just a difficult season for the entire team, but in particular, what was a really weird situation between him and the coaching staff last season. Other bright spots as well. You saw Malik Beasley, prove his worth to this team, especially for the deal that they got for him this offseason. May I remind you, 1 year, $6 million is the price tag that Malik Beasley was. And he shot 5 of 8 from 3. He was awesome. He was probably the third or fourth best Piston on the court tonight. He's certainly been the best veteran, that the Pistons have acquired this offseason. And we'll get to the others here in a second. In particular, we'll have that elephant in the room talk about Tobias Harris. But in particular for Malik Beasley, I think he's been exactly what you've wanted out of that acquisition thus far. And listen, if he keeps playing this well, I think it's more than justified to have him as a spark plug off the bench and for someone to kind of be, like one of those primary scorers. for the Pistons, but at the same light, you know, he might be more than justifying a reason for him to be in the starting lineup. And on top of that, I think if you're the Pistons and you're looking at, if this level of play can maintain, obviously Jaden Ivey's talked about getting assets and, wanting to help build up the cupboard for the Pistons. He could either be someone that, could potentially get them, pretty decent assets, maybe even, like like some seconds or a first round pick, perhaps, through, towards the trade deadline. Or if you really like how he's playing and you think that he wants to be here and can continue to play at this level, you can extend him for another pretty decent contract. And he's already been pretty, financially friendly, in this deal. So you never know what could potentially come up in the future. Cade Cunningham, despite the turnover issue, which, you have to address, it's 16 turnovers in 2 games, which, is just not going to cut it. I think in a lot of other areas, Cade, stepped up and played really well. He did have 10 assists tonight, despite the turnovers. He was really solid on the glass. He had 4 blocks, which is a career high for Cade. He was really solid in that aspect. He did struggle from shooting from beyond the arc, and that's something, again, that you want to see pick up as well, just for the entire team in general, but especially for Cade and, Tobias Harris as well. But overall, I would say that's like one of the better overall games that Cade's had in his career, and especially that third quarter where he helped lead that run and helped lead the charge on the defensive side of the court. I think that's, some of the best basketball that we've seen from Cade, and it shows that he can hang with the big boys. He can go out and put on stellar performances and actually play really well against the class of the league. And, listen, we all heard the comments of Jaylen Brown talking about how, when they're playing a Detroit, a team that struggled the last year or two, they can go feed a guy like Peyton Pritchard. And listen, in the first half, he was 100% right. But as you saw in those final few minutes of the fourth quarter, the Celtics really had to lock in and get their together to pull this one out. It took like great defensive plays from Derek White, Drew Holiday, and Jaylen Brown for them to close this one out. So it's not like if you're the Boston Celtics, you're walking out of Detroit necessarily feeling super great about this win and how things look. Now, what you are feeling pretty good about if you're the Boston Celtics is Jason Tatum's the best player in the world right now. And I just think that's indisputable. At least through the first week, he had 37 points tonight, yet another 30-point game. I quite frankly, I said it on Twitter and I really mean it. I think Steve Kerr is going to get a lot of text messages. He's going to get a lot of crap from coaches, from executives, from people around the league for the fire that he lit under the ass of Jason Tatum, of Jaylen Brown, and the rest of the Boston Celtics. I know he wasn't directly involved necessarily in, whether or not Brown was selected as part of that USA team in the Olympics, but he was the head coach of that roster. If he really wanted Jaylen Brown in that, on that team, I think he could have made it happen. On top of that, I think Jason Tatum probably could have been of use in that rotation, especially if he was playing like this. Now, granted, he wasn't playing the greatest basketball in the Olympics. His shot had that weird hitch when he was in France. His jump shot looks as good as it's ever been. Like it's unreal. So I got to take a second and acknowledge, like we witnessed the best player in basketball doing the best player in basketball things tonight. So if that continues and if he continues at this pace, again, I don't bet on basketball, but if you do, I would highly recommend looking at the odds where they sit for Jason Tatum for MVP. So definitely would highly recommend that. Now, as far as, things that we got to discuss, without a question, Tobias Harris through the first 3 games, it has been a struggle thus far in his return to Detroit. He was 0 for 5 from beyond the arc, struggled, shooting the ball, tonight. And listen, he struggled shooting since coming to Detroit. Those last 2 quarters in against Indiana, he's, he didn't score. He didn't score in the first half in Cleveland. So he essentially went a full game's time without scoring the basketball. And, I still don't think it's necessarily time to be, I saw someone call him Joe Harris. I think that's still premature just from the standpoint that, a Tobias Harris is, still figuring out his way with playing with these young guys. Biggerstaff said it last night that, he thinks he's really just trying to fit around these guys, learning how they like to play the game, learning how they like to get to their spots and trying to fit within that. So I have confidence that within the next week or so, we're going to see Tobias Harris play, a pretty good game. This just wasn't one of them. And listen, he did still find ways to contribute. He did still find ways to slot in. He had a block and a steal. He led the team in rebounds tonight. He had a couple of assists. Like he still found ways to plug holes. He's still, a very clearly a vocal leader of this team. So I don't want to, necessarily come here and poo-poo on Tobias Harris just because of the fact that he is a veteran. He is someone that, in my opinion, can still get out of this slump. I don't think this is a situation like a Joe Harris where he's just not an NBA caliber guy. Now, I will say there's a reason why the Pistons gave themselves a window with Tobias Harris. There's a reason why he signed a 2-year contract and not a 3 or a 4-year deal. There's a reason why Detroit gave themselves the option to get out of the Tobias Harris contract if need be, right? So I'm not saying that, it's time to sound the alarms. I'm not saying that he's going to come out and be all-star Jason Tatum. But again, I think you're seeing that he's not necessarily going to have to be the second option on this team. I think if Tobias Harris can get like a consistent 15 points a game, shoot 40%, 38% from three, that's something that brings value. He just has to get there. And that's really the big thing. Tim Hardaway Jr., after having a couple of really solid games shooting from beyond the arc, just struggled in this one. Just wasn't his night as far as beyond the arc. And listen, I mean, in that fourth quarter, it seemed like every shot, there was just that audible gasp in the air, just waiting for the Pistons to hit the dagger, to close the deal, to make this game out of reach, but they just couldn't get that shot. And I still think they're figuring out what sets work for them. Like what are their, go-to things when it comes down to the stretch? What are the things that will get you high percentage looks? And when you talk about, what separates the good from the great, the young teams from the playoff teams, it really is those things in the margins. It's turnovers, it's free throw attempts, it's timely fouls, it's having consistent defense through 4 quarters. As good as the Pistons played, if they kept up that energy through 3 quarters, we're probably talking about a Pistons win. But it was really only a quarter and a half to 2 quarters of high level basketball. The rest was probably some of their worst defensive effort we've seen on tape this year, right? Like that in the Cleveland game last night. So overall, a great step, a great bounce back half and bounce back performance from what they had last night in Cleveland. They played the class of the NBA and the Boston Celtics. So it's not like we're sitting here and talking about a game that they lost and like we're just absolutely shocked. Like I think absolutely every one of us would have chalked up this game as a loss when the calendar came out, just because, again, the Boston Celtics are poised to win 70 plus games this year. I fully feel that way. Barring injuries, barring setbacks, that's the best team in basketball. They're poised to repeat. But for the Pistons, they're still clearly figuring out their rotations, who got who's going to fit in where. And listen, I'll say this with, some of the turnovers, I think it would really behoove, the Pistons at some point to really, start considering what they're going to do with that third point guard spot because of the fact that they are, struggling in that area. I think one thing that would help Cade is if he could play more time with a point guard that could stretch the floor, but also, set up the offense. And listen, if I'm the Pistons, I'll just say it. I'd monitor what's going on in Chicago with Lonzo Ball and Josh Giddey. And, specifically the fact that, Lonzo's on an expiring deal. He's clearly not the same athlete as he was, but as a second or third point guard for this team, as someone that can, come off the bench and, hit, about 40% of his threes, as someone that is as good of a basketball IQ as he has, as good of a passer as he is, I think he would actually fit really well with Cade. And listen, is he the defensive player that he once was? Absolutely not. But I think in Detroit, I think it would make some sense. So, and listen, it's pretty clear Marcus Sasser's not in the rotation. He's not. I don't think he's necessarily going to be someone that is in the plans of Trajan Langdon and these guys going forward. You never know. You could see them experiment with the rotation if they continue to, lose games and, see some form of slide. And that's actually something that I'm curious about. And we're going to talk about more on the podcast when we record on Monday. I think that the thing that I'm curious with, to watch with this Pistons team is what's the leash for this group? Specifically, how many games or how long will, of a sample size is this front office looking for before they're taking calls, before they're having conversations, before they're starting to formulate who's going to stay and who's going to go? I think obviously you want to see what, Asar Thompson looks like and, how he's doing coming off of the health issues. I would expect that he's more than part of their future plans and what they have going on in Detroit. But, when you just look at like, the fact that this is a team that had the losing streak that they did last year. And I think the last thing that you want to see from this Pistons group this year is to have another spiral of that magnitude or even near that magnitude, right? Like I think if you're the Pistons, if you could avoid a double-digit losing streak this year, I think like you have to. So, especially if you want to keep the momentum of this group to, feel confident with the core that you have going forward, to be happy with what you have. I think that's, just something to consider. And again, you don't want to overreact. It's 3 games in. They played 3 of the top 4 teams in the Eastern Conference, including the champions of the Boston Celtics, who are 3-0, who could win 70 plus games. Got all those quantifiers out of the way. Having said that, if they have limited wins, if we don't see progression, continued progression from certain guys, like a Jalen Duren, like what does that look like going forward? And listen, I thought Jalen Duren, I think he had a better game tonight than he did last night. He had 2 blocks. He was better on the defensive side of the ball. I think it's pretty difficult for anyone when you're switched on Jason Tatum, but I just think he in particular, just wasn't a great matchup and as far as that goes. I think there were moments where he was able to disturb more shots tonight. Would still love to see Jalen Duren back, to his usual rebounding numbers. Specifically, he only had 9 boards tonight. He was out rebounded by Ron Holland last night. He was out rebounded by Tobias Harris tonight. And I mean, as long as they're winning the rebounding battle, which, they really were, they won the rebounding battle by 7. So they were right. They were more than up in that category, but Jalen Duren, I know he's a better rebounder than that. And, just to see him get back to those numbers, to continue to progress as a rim protector, like I still firmly believe that in order for the Pistons to take that step that we know that they can take, in order for them to become that defensive team, they need better defense on that back line. I think a lot of the threes that they're giving up and a lot of the bad perimeter defense that you're seeing from this Pistons team is because of the fact that they're giving up so many guys are getting towards the cup, getting close to the basket. The guys are going to have to collapse in, and therefore you're getting those open corner threes. You're getting those open threes on the wings. Like that's where a lot of those easy looks for teams like Boston and teams like Cleveland, that's where they're getting generated from. And especially if you're going to give that up to the Boston Celtics, as we saw, they're going to hit it every damn time. Side note, the fact that they took 48 threes tonight, wow. That's a whole other discussion and, just about where the game of basketball is at. And, I agree with people like Nick Wright who say to the casual observer that there is, some alarm bells that need to be raised about where 3-point shooting is at. Don't get me wrong. You see players at this level that can shoot at that level is something, to be in awe of. It is an amazing skill. But at what point does it go too far? At what point do we need to, evolutionally, to evolve as a league and as a game and realize when things like that are becoming a problem. So I'm not saying that the league needs to consider like a 4-point shot. I'm not necessarily an advocate for something like that because let's be honest, that might like teams might start just going for 4s then. But having said that, we have to incentivize physical play. We have to get guys back playing towards the cup. I mean, Victor Wembanyama is shooting threes from the logo. A 7'6" big who could probably shoot close to 70% from the like in the paint at, like every season is shooting logo threes. If that doesn't tell you where the league is at, I don't know what does. So it's going to be a fascinating thing to see evolve as the game goes on. But I do really quickly want to see if there's any questions, any thoughts here in the chat before I do go offline. While those, potentially come in or while I'm looking, thanks so much everyone for tuning in. If you like the content that we do, please sure to leave the video a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you're not missing any of the content that we have going on. You could also follow myself on X at Sean Half Court. I go to Pistons games throughout the season and cover them as credentialed media for the Pistons. My first game will be on November 10th against the Houston Rockets. So I'll have the opportunity to head down to the LCA real soon to see how the team looks in person. But, again, it's just the level of basketball that we're seeing, just from this league, from this team, from everything. It's going to be a fascinating season. I'd be willing to take a chance on Lonzo Ball. I mean, listen, the thing that's, the thing that's enticing about Alonzo Ball is that you would essentially have his bird rights. He is an expiring contract. It's a low risk, like moderate reward, to see what he can be. He's the first player to ever come back from the type of injury that he had. He's the first player to ever come back from a cartilage transplant. Think about that. And it's crazy because he was only supposed to be out for 4 to 8 weeks. And before that, he was playing the best basketball of his career. He was an all-star caliber guard. And then it was the question of, could he ever play basketball again? But now, especially with, let's be honest, like, I just think that, if you are talking about like players to trade and like where they need to like improve, it is that point guard spot. And I think Sasser is a guy that you could potentially, package in because of the fact that he has shown some flashes of potential. He is, a young guard on a very cheap contract who can space the floor at a moderate level. I do think his size and his lack of defensive ability and the fact that he isn't super comfortable as a point guard is something that would make it difficult to trade him. But I do still think that he is someone that, especially, if you're talking about who the Pistons are going to potentially be packaging in deals, without a doubt, I think he's someone, especially for salary purposes, for how young he is, he's definitely someone you can package in a trade. I don't know if teams are going to be calling about Marcus Sasser, but I definitely think he's someone that, a GM would certainly take a chance on him, especially if you're in the Cooper flag race. Like, if I'm Brooklyn, why not? You know what I'm saying? Hey, Sean, I have a question. Pick me. Do you think I have a chance? A chance at making the Pistons? A chance at what? What does this mean, Mr. Jones? Longtime supporter. Appreciate having you. What does it mean you have a chance? I'll just say yes. You have a chance at anything, my friend. Reach for the stars. But that's pretty much my thoughts on this game. That's gonna do it. Mr. Jones for backup point guard. You know what? Get him in the gym. Go to the cruise tryout. See what you can do. Show the organization that you are the solution that they need. Although you might need to buy some real life VC to get that jump shot up. I don't know. I'm just saying. But anyway, thanks so much again for tuning in. I'm going to go chill out after that game. I'll see you guys later this week here on From Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed so you're not missing any of the content going on here. Thanks again, guys.